The grand celestial palace stood at the heart of the Zarthenian capital world, its crystal towers reaching toward the purple sky. Inside the massive throne room, Emperor Vextar sat upon his golden seat, watching as dozens of alien dignitaries filled the hall. They had come from every corner of the galaxy for this important meeting. The Emperor's blue skin gleamed under the bright lights, and his four eyes scanned the crowd with careful attention. Princess Lyranis stood beside her father's throne, wearing the traditional silver robes of her people. She was young by Zarthenian standards, barely 200 years old, and her pale blue skin seemed to glow with inner light. Her people considered her the most beautiful princess in the empire, and her father had decided it was time for her to marry. The peace summit would serve two purposes: discuss important political matters and introduce the princess to potential husbands from their allied species. The princess felt nervous as she looked at the assembled guests. There were tall, insect-like beings from the hive worlds, floating gas creatures from the nebula colonies, and hulking rock people from the asteroid kingdoms. Each species brought their finest representatives, and many had brought their sons or nobles who hoped to win her hand in marriage. "My daughter," the Emperor said quietly, leaning toward her, "remember to smile and be gracious. These alliances are important for our empire." Lyranis nodded, though her stomach felt tight with worry. She knew her duty to her people, but the thought of marrying a stranger from another world frightened her. She had always dreamed of marrying for love, like in the old stories her mother used to tell her before she died. The great doors at the far end of the hall suddenly opened, and a new group entered. The entire room seemed to fall silent. The princess noticed how the other aliens stepped back, creating space around the newcomers. Two figures walked forward, and Lyranis felt her breath catch. They were humans. The princess had heard of humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard about them by now. They were the newest species to join the galactic community, having only made contact 5 years ago. But it was not their newness that made them famous. It was what they had done during the Karathor War. The Karathor were a violent species that had attacked human colonies without warning. They were fierce warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds before humanity stopped them. But the humans had not just stopped the Karathor. They had defeated them completely, pushing them back and destroying their military power in a war that lasted only 2 years. The speed and brutality of the human victory had shocked the entire galaxy. The man walking in front was tall by human standards, with short brown hair and green eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He wore a simple uniform, dark blue with silver markings that indicated his rank. Scars marked his hands, and a thin line ran across his left cheek. This was Captain Jake Morrison, the hero of the Battle of New Terra, the man who had held off an entire Karathor army with just 300 soldiers. Behind him walked a woman with red hair tied back in a tight knot. Lieutenant Amy Parker was known throughout the fleet as Jake's most trusted officer. She had fought beside him in a dozen battles and was said to be nearly as dangerous as he was. The other aliens in the room whispered to each other as the humans passed. Some looked frightened, others curious, but all showed respect. The humans had proven themselves in the only way the galaxy truly understood, through strength in battle. Emperor Vextar rose from his throne as Jake and Amy approached. The Emperor was twice the size of the human captain, but somehow Jake did not look small or weak. He walked with quiet confidence, his eyes meeting the Emperor's without fear. "Captain Morrison," the Emperor said, his voice booming through the hall. "Welcome to Zarthenia. We are honored to have representatives from Earth at our summit." Jake bowed slightly, a gesture of respect without submission. "Thank you, Emperor Vextar. Earth is honored by your invitation. We hope this summit will strengthen the friendship between our peoples." The Emperor smiled, showing his pointed teeth. "Indeed, please join the other guests. We have much to discuss in the coming days." As Jake and Amy moved to take their places among the other dignitaries, Lyranis found herself watching the human captain. She had heard so many stories about him. Her military advisors spoke of his battles with a mixture of fear and admiration. They said he never gave up, never surrendered, no matter how hopeless the situation. They said he could turn any place into a fortress and any object into a weapon. They said his soldiers would follow him into certain death, because they trusted him completely. One of her father's generals had told her a story about the siege of Colony 7. The Karathor had surrounded a civilian settlement with 10,000 soldiers. Jake had only 300 troops and a few old defense guns. The Karathor commander had demanded surrender, promising to spare the civilians if the humans gave up. Jake had refused. For 3 days and 3 nights he had held them off, using tricks and traps that the Karathor had never seen before. He collapsed tunnels, created false positions, and led small raids that made the enemy think his forces were much larger. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Jake and his remaining soldiers still fighting. The Karathor had lost over 4,000 troops. Jake had saved every civilian in the colony. Another story told of how he had infiltrated a Karathor command ship alone. He had stolen a Karathor uniform from a dead soldier, walked through their security, and planted explosives in their engine room. The ship had been destroyed, and Jake had escaped by stealing a fighter craft and flying through a debris field that should have killed him. The stories went on, each one more incredible than the last. To Lyranus, Jake Morrison sounded like a monster, a killing machine that could not be stopped. She felt a cold fear in her chest as she watched him. What kind of person could do such things? What kind of mind could think of such violent and clever ways to win? The formal reception began, and the princess was led down from the throne to meet the various guests. First came Prince Zelmar of the Vorian Confederacy, a tall, proud being with golden scales and a long tail. He bowed deeply and spoke of his family's wealth and power, clearly trying to impress her. Lyranus smiled politely but felt nothing. Next came Lord Kirtan, a merchant prince from the trading guilds. He was short and round with 6 arms that gestured constantly as he talked about the riches he could bring to the empire through their union. Again, Lyranus smiled and nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept glancing toward where Jake stood with Amy, speaking quietly with some of the other military officers. He seemed relaxed, even casual, so different from the demon warrior of the stories. But Lyranus knew that appearances could deceive. Perhaps his calmness was just another weapon, a way to make his enemies lower their guard before he struck. As the evening wore on, the princess excused herself and retreated to a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The twin moons were rising, casting silver light across the flowering trees. She breathed in the cool night air, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "Beautiful night," a voice said behind her. Lyranus spun around, her heart jumping. Jake Morrison stood a few meters away, his hands clasped behind his back. He had approached so quietly that she had not heard him at all. Another warrior skill, she thought with fear. "I apologize," Jake said quickly, noticing her reaction. "I did not mean to startle you. I just needed some air. These formal events can be overwhelming." The princess nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. Up close, Jake looked tired. Lines marked his face around his eyes, and she could see more scars on his neck that his uniform collar usually hid. "The gardens are lovely," Jake continued, looking out over the view. "They remind me of home. Earth has places like this, though not quite as grand." He smiled slightly, a sad expression that made him look younger somehow. "My mother kept a garden when I was a child. Nothing like this, just a small patch behind our house. But she loved it. She said that growing things helped her remember that life was about more than just surviving." Lyranus found herself responding before she could stop herself. "Your mother sounds wise." Jake's smile faded. She was. "She died during the Karathor attacks on the outer colonies, along with my father and my younger sister, Kate. Kate was only 16. She loved flowers." The princess felt a sudden stab of sympathy, which confused her. This was the feared warrior, the unstoppable soldier, but the pain in his voice was real and raw. "I am sorry for your loss," she said softly. Jake nodded once. "Thank you, princess. War takes much from everyone." He turned to leave, then paused. "I should return to the reception. Again, I apologize for disturbing you." He walked away, leaving Lyranus alone on the balcony. She stood there for a long time, watching the moons and thinking about the human captain. He was not what she had expected. The stories had made him sound like a monster, but she had just seen something else. Pain, loss, humanity. But that just made her more confused and more afraid. A monster she could understand and avoid, but a man who fought like a demon yet grieved like anyone else? That was far more complicated and far more dangerous to her heart. The next morning brought a grand breakfast in the palace's eastern hall. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting colorful patterns across the marble floor. Long tables were arranged in a wide circle, each covered with foods from different worlds. The smell of exotic spices and strange dishes filled the air. Princess Lyranus sat at the main table with her father, picking at her food without much appetite. She had not slept well. Dreams of war and flowers had mixed together in confusing ways, and she kept seeing Jake's sad smile when he spoke of his dead sister. Across the hall, the human captain sat with Amy and several military officers from other species. Lyranus noticed how the other officers kept a careful distance from him, as if afraid to get too close. Even when they spoke to him, their body language showed respect mixed with fear. "You seem distracted, daughter," Emperor Vextar said quietly. His 4 eyes studied her with concern. "I am fine, father," Lyranus replied, forcing a smile. "Just tired from yesterday's excitement." The Emperor nodded but did not look convinced. Before he could say more, General Thaxnor approached the table. The old soldier bowed deeply to the Emperor and Princess. "Your Majesty, Your Highness," the general said, his deep voice rumbling. "I wanted to inform you that we have arranged a demonstration for this afternoon. Several of our allied forces will show their combat capabilities. It should be quite entertaining." "Excellent," the Emperor said. "Will the humans participate?" "Captain Morrison has agreed to give a presentation on human tactics," General Thaxnor replied. His expression was difficult to read. "It should be educational." After breakfast, the princess returned to her chambers. Her attendant, a young Zarthenian woman named Iris, helped her change into more comfortable robes. "The whole palace is talking about the humans," Iris said as she worked. "The servants are frightened but also curious. They say Captain Morrison killed 1,000 Karathor soldiers by himself." "That is an exaggeration," Lyranus said, though she was not entirely sure. The stories about Jake seemed to grow wilder with each telling. "Maybe," Iris agreed. "But even the guards are nervous. Commander Vex spoke with him this morning and said the captain has eyes like a hunting predator. Always watching, always thinking." Lyranus thought about those green eyes and how they had looked when Jake spoke of his mother's garden. They had seemed sad and gentle, not predatory. But perhaps that was another mask, another tool in a warrior's arsenal. "What else do they say?" the princess asked, surprising herself with her own curiosity. Iris leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Cook's assistant has a cousin who serves on one of the border stations. She said that during the war, the Karathor put a massive bounty on Captain Morrison's head. They called him the Ghost because he could appear anywhere and disappear just as quickly. They say he once walked through their entire army camp, planted bombs, and walked out again before anyone realized he had been there." "That sounds impossible," Lyranus said. "That is what everyone thought," Iris replied. "But the Karathor base was destroyed, and Captain Morrison was seen leaving in one of their own ships. The Karathor commander was so embarrassed that he tried to cover up the whole incident." More stories came throughout the day. A guard told of how Jake had organized the defense of an entire planet with just a handful of soldiers and civilian volunteers. A visiting diplomat mentioned the Battle of the Red Nebula, where human ships had used completely new tactics that confused and defeated a much larger Karathor fleet. Each story added to the legend, making Jake seem less like a man and more like a force of nature. By the time afternoon arrived, Lyranus felt her earlier sympathy being replaced by renewed fear. How could someone so young have done so many incredible and terrifying things? Jake appeared to be in his early 30s, young for a military commander. Yet he had already become a legend. The combat demonstration was held in the palace's main training arena. Thousands of seats surrounded a large open space where soldiers could show their skills. The Emperor sat in the royal box with Lyranus beside him. The other dignitaries filled the surrounding seats, all eager to see the displays. First came the Vorian warriors, led by Prince Zelmar himself. They wore shining armor and carried energy weapons that glowed with blue light. Their demonstration was impressive, showing perfect formations and coordinated attacks. They moved like a single organism, each warrior knowing exactly where the others would be. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Next came soldiers from the hive worlds. These insect-like beings swarmed across the arena floor, showing how they could overwhelm enemies with pure numbers and fearless attacks. Their demonstration was shorter but no less impressive. They could climb walls, fly short distances, and coordinate through some kind of mental link. Several other groups performed, each showing the unique strengths of their species. The rock people demonstrated their incredible physical power, lifting weights that would crush most other beings. The gas creatures showed how they could pass through small spaces and survive in environments that would kill others. Finally, General Thaxnor stood and announced the human demonstration. The crowd grew quiet, Everyone leaning forward with anticipation, Jake and Amy walked onto the arena floor, carrying no weapons and wearing only their simple uniforms. Captain Morrison has agreed to explain some basic human military philosophy, the general said. Captain, the floor is yours. Jake looked around at the thousands of watching faces. If he felt nervous, he did not show it. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the arena. Thank you, General, he said. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest or the most numerous. Our technology is still catching up to most of yours. So how did we defeat the Karathar, who were stronger, more numerous, and had better weapons? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. We won because we refused to fight the way they expected, Jake continued. The Karathar believed in direct confrontation. They believed the stronger army would always win. But humans learned long ago that strength is not just about muscles or weapons. It is about using your mind, understanding your enemy, and never giving up. Jake gestured to Amy, who brought out a simple wooden box and placed it on the ground. Let me show you what I mean, Jake said. Lieutenant Parker represents a superior enemy force. She is stronger, better armed, and has more soldiers. I am a human commander with limited resources, defending a position I cannot abandon. Amy drew a practice weapon, a staff that would register hits without causing injury. Jake stood beside the box unarmed and apparently helpless. The Karathar would simply charge forward, using their superior strength to crush me, Jake said. But what would I do? Amy began her approach, moving quickly and confidently. Jake waited until she was close, then suddenly kicked the box toward her feet. Amy had to jump over it, and in that moment of distraction, Jake rolled to the side, grabbed the box, and threw it at her weapon hand. The impact made her drop the staff, which Jake immediately grabbed. The entire exchange took less than 5 seconds. Suddenly, Jake had the weapon, and Amy was on the defensive. Humans use our environment, Jake explained, tossing the staff back to Amy for the next demonstration. We use distraction, surprise, and psychology. We make the enemy react to us instead of acting according to their plan. For the next hour, Jake and Amy demonstrated various tactics. They showed how a smaller force could use terrain to neutralize superior numbers. They explained how misdirection could make an enemy waste resources attacking false targets. They demonstrated how understanding an enemy's culture and psychology could predict their actions and create traps. Lyranus watched with growing fascination and horror. Every demonstration showed the same pattern, a seemingly impossible situation that Jake turned to his advantage through cleverness and unconventional thinking. He moved with practiced ease, and she realized that every motion was efficient and purposeful. There was no wasted energy, no unnecessary movement. The most important human weapon is not our guns or ships, Jake said as the demonstration concluded. It is our refusal to accept defeat. Humans have a saying, it is not over until it is over. No matter how bad things look, we keep fighting, keep thinking, keep hoping. The Karathar could not understand this. They thought if they made things hard enough, we would surrender. But surrender is not in our nature when we are protecting our families and homes. His voice grew quieter but more intense. Every human who fought in the war knew what the Karathar had done to our colonies. We knew what they would do to Earth if we lost. So we fought with everything we had, and we never stopped fighting until they could not threaten us anymore. The arena was completely silent. Then slowly applause began. It started with 1 or 2 aliens and grew until the entire stadium was clapping. But Lyranus noticed that the applause sounded different from what the other demonstrations had received. This was not just appreciation for skill. It was acknowledgement of something deeper and more frightening. The realization that humans were truly dangerous. Not because they were strong, but because they could not be broken. As Jake and Amy left the arena floor, Lyranus felt her hands trembling. She had just seen proof of everything the stories had said. Jake Morrison was... Princess Lyranus woke to soft knocking on her chamber door. The morning light was just beginning to filter through the curtains, painting her room in shades of purple and gold. She sat up slowly, feeling tired despite having slept through the night. "Enter," she called. Iris came in carrying a tray with breakfast. But instead of her usual cheerful expression, the attendant looked worried. "Good morning, Your Highness," Iris said quietly. "The Emperor requests your presence in his private study immediately after you finish eating." Lyranus felt her stomach tighten. Her father only summoned her to his private study for important matters. Did he say what this is about? Iris shook her head. "No, Princess, but he seemed very serious." After eating quickly and dressing in formal robes, Lyranis made her way through the palace corridors to her father's study. The guards at the door bowed and opened it for her. Inside, Emperor Vextar stood by the window looking out over the city below. He turned as she entered. "Good morning, daughter. Please sit." Lyranis took a seat on one of the comfortable chairs, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. Her father sat across from her, his 4 eyes studying her face with the intensity that had made him a successful ruler for 3 centuries. "I will not waste time with pleasantries," the Emperor began. "You know that this summit has 2 purposes. The political negotiations are going well, but we must also address the matter of your marriage." "Yes, father," Lyranis said quietly. "I have given this much thought," Vextar continued. "I have considered all the potential suitors who have presented themselves. Prince Zelmar would bring a strong military alliance. Lord Kirtan would bring wealth. The others offer various advantages. But I believe there is one alliance that would benefit our empire more than any other." Lyranis felt her heart begin to race. She knew what was coming before her father spoke the words. "An alliance with humanity," the Emperor said, "and specifically a marriage between you and Captain Jake Morrison." "Father, no." The words burst out before Lyranis could stop them. She stood up, her hands clenched. "Not him. Please, anyone but him." Emperor Vextar's expression did not change. "Sit down, daughter. Let me explain." Lyranis sank back into her chair, fighting the urge to cry. "I understand your fear," her father said. "I have seen how you watch the human captain. You have heard the stories about his battles and they frighten you. But think about what those stories mean." The Emperor leaned forward. "Humanity defeated the Karathor in 2 years. The Karathor had been a threat to this region of space for decades. They conquered 12 worlds and threatened dozens more. Our empire tried to stop them 3 times and failed each time. We lost thousands of soldiers. But humanity, a species we had never even heard of, stopped them completely." "But father," Lyranis said, her voice shaking, "the stories about Captain Morrison, the things he has done, he is dangerous." "He is exactly as dangerous as he needs to be," Vextar replied. "That is what makes him valuable. More importantly, his people respect him. He is young but already a hero to humanity. If you marry him, Earth will be bound to our empire not just through politics but through personal connection. The humans will become our strongest allies." The Emperor's expression softened slightly. "I know this is not what you hoped for. You wanted to marry for love like your mother and I did. But we are royalty, daughter. Our choices affect billions of lives. This marriage could prevent wars, save countless people, and strengthen our empire for generations." "He frightens me," Lyranis whispered. "I know," her father said gently, "but I have watched him these past 2 days. I have spoken with him privately. He is not the monster the stories make him seem. He is a soldier who did what he had to do to protect his people. There is a difference." Vextar stood and walked to his desk, picking up a datapad. "I have read the full reports from the Karathor War, not just the exciting stories everyone tells. Do you know that Captain Morrison requested non-lethal weapons for his troops whenever possible? Do you know that he personally ensured that Karathor prisoners were treated well, and according to galactic law? Do you know that he resigned his commission 3 times because he disagreed with orders he thought were too aggressive?" The Emperor set down the datapad. Each time, Earth's government refused his resignation and changed the orders to meet his ethical standards. They did this because they knew he was right. He is not a man who loves violence, daughter. He is a man who is very good at violence when it is necessary to protect others. Lyranis listened to her father's words, but they did not calm her fear. The image of Jake demonstrating combat tactics, moving with such practiced skill, kept playing in her mind. "I am not commanding you to marry him," the Emperor said. "I will not force this choice. But I am asking you to consider it seriously. Spend time with him. Talk to him. Learn who he really is beneath the reputation. Then make your decision. And if I say no," Lyranis asked, "then I will respect your choice," Vextar said. "But I want you to truly know what you are refusing before you decide. Will you do that for me? For our empire?" Lyranis looked at her father's face and saw the weight of leadership there. He was not just her father in this moment. He was an emperor responsible for billions of lives. She thought about her duty, about the responsibility that came with being a princess. "How much time do I have?" she asked quietly. "The summit lasts 1 more week," her father replied. "That should be enough time to get to know him. I will arrange for you to spend time together in various settings. The choice will be yours, but make it an informed choice. After leaving her father's study, Lyranis walked through the palace in a daze. Her mind was spinning with thoughts and emotions, fear, duty, confusion, and something else she could not quite name, all mixed together. She found herself in the royal gardens, the same place where she had encountered Jake 2 nights before. The flowers were in full bloom, their sweet scent filling the air. She sat on a stone bench and tried to calm her racing thoughts. Princess Lyranis? She looked up to see Amy standing a short distance away. The human lieutenant approached carefully, as if worried about disturbing her. "I apologize if I am intruding," Amy said. "I was walking in the gardens and saw you. You looked upset. I can leave if you prefer." "No, it is fine," Lyranis heard herself say. "Please sit if you wish." Amy sat on the other end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Amy said, "The gardens really are beautiful." Jake was right about that. "You have known Captain Morrison for a long time?" Lyranis asked. 5 years, Amy replied, "since before the war started. He was my commanding officer when the Karathor attacked our training base. He saved my life that day along with dozens of others." "The stories about him," Lyranis said hesitantly. "Are they true?" Amy was quiet for a moment. "The facts are mostly true. The interpretation is often wrong. People hear about the siege of Colony 7 and think Jake is some kind of unstoppable warrior. They do not hear about the nightmares he had afterward, or how he visited every injured soldier personally, or how he cried when we held the memorial service for the ones who did not make it." The lieutenant looked at the flowers. "Jake Morrison is the best person I have ever known. He is brilliant and brave, yes. But more importantly, he cares. Every decision he makes, every tactic he uses is designed to save lives. Not just human lives, but all lives. Even during the war, he tried to minimize Karathor casualties when possible. But the stories make him sound so dangerous," Lyranis said. "He is dangerous," Amy agreed. "To enemies who threaten innocent people. But to friends, to people he cares about, he is the safest person you could know. He would die before he let harm come to someone under his protection." Amy stood up. "I should go. But Princess, whatever decision you are facing regarding Jake, I hope you will see him for who he really is, not what his reputation makes him seem. He deserves that much." After Amy left, Lyranis sat alone with her thoughts. The lieutenant's words had given her something to think about. Perhaps the man and the legend were not the same thing. Perhaps the warrior everyone feared was also the man who cried at memorial services and worried about minimizing casualties. That evening, a formal dinner was held in the Great Hall. The seating had been arranged differently this time, and Lyranis found herself placed next to Jake Morrison. Her father had clearly begun his plan to make them spend time together. Jake stood when she approached, bowing slightly. "Princess, it is an honor to dine with you." "Captain Morrison," she replied, taking her seat. Her hands felt cold despite the warm room. The dinner began, and servers brought course after course of elaborate dishes. Jake ate quietly, occasionally making polite conversation with the other guests nearby. He did not try to force conversation with Lyranis, which she appreciated. Halfway through the meal, a Vorian dignitary across the table addressed Jake. "Captain Morrison, I am curious. Humans seem to excel at warfare despite being physically weaker than many species. What is your secret?" Jake set down his fork and thought for a moment. "We do not think of ourselves as excelling at warfare. We think of ourselves as excelling at survival. For most of our history, humans were not the strongest creatures on our own planet. We survived by being clever, adaptable, and by working together." Princess Lyranis stood at the garden entrance, smoothing her robes nervously. The morning sun was warm on her skin, and the air smelled of blooming flowers. She had barely touched her breakfast, her stomach too tight with anxiety to eat properly. Iris had tried to encourage her, but nothing had helped calm her nerves. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Jake approaching. He wore a simple civilian outfit instead of his military uniform. Plain clothes and earth tones that made him look less intimidating, but Lyranis still felt her heart race as he came closer. "Good morning, Princess," Jake said with a small smile. "Thank you for agreeing to show me the gardens." "Good morning, Captain," Lyranis replied, her voice coming out more stiffly than she intended. "Shall we begin?" They walked through the garden gates, entering the vast green space. The palace gardens covered several acres, filled with plants from dozens of worlds. Carefully maintained paths wound between flower beds and ornamental trees. Small streams crossed under decorative bridges, and the sound of water added to the peaceful atmosphere. Lyranes led them down the main path, pointing out different plants but saying little else. She was very aware of Jake walking beside her, and she kept a careful distance between them. Her body was tense, ready to run if needed, though she knew running from someone like Jake would be pointless. After several minutes of awkward silence, Jake stopped walking. Lyranes stopped too, turning to look at him with worry. "Princess," Jake said gently, "I can see that this makes you uncomfortable. If you would prefer, I can ask Lieutenant Parker to take my place, or we could simply end the tour now. I do not want you to feel forced into anything." His consideration surprised her. "My father arranged this," she said. "I cannot simply leave." "Of course you can," Jake replied. "Your father asked us to spend time together, but if you are truly uncomfortable, I am sure he would understand. I do not want you to be frightened of me." Lyranes studied his face. He looked genuinely concerned, not angry or impatient. "You know what my father is planning," she said. It was not a question. Jake nodded slowly. "Emperor Vexitar spoke with me yesterday. He suggested a marriage alliance between our peoples. He made it clear that the choice would be yours, but he hoped we could at least get to know each other first." "And what do you think of this idea?" Lyranes asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake was quiet for a moment, looking out over the gardens. "Honestly, I think arranged marriages are not ideal. I believe people should marry because they care for each other, not because of politics. But I also understand that people like us, people born into positions of responsibility, do not always get to choose based only on our own desires." He met her eyes. "If you do not want this, I will tell your father that I decline the offer. I will make it my decision so that you face no pressure. Your father's goal is an alliance with humanity, and that can be achieved through other means." Lyranes felt some of her tension ease. He was offering her an escape, taking the burden on himself. The stories had not mentioned this side of him, the side that thought about other people's feelings. "I am afraid of you," she admitted. "The stories about what you have done in the war, they make you sound like a monster." Jake's expression grew sad. "I understand. War brings out the worst in people, even when they are fighting for good reasons. I have done things I am not proud of, things that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The stories make me sound like I enjoyed it, but I did not. I hated every moment." He gestured to a nearby bench. "May we sit? I would like to tell you something." They sat down and Jake looked at his hands. Lyranes noticed the scars there, marks from old injuries. "During the siege of Colony 7, Jake began. The siege that everyone talks about. There was a moment when I thought we would lose. It was the second night, and the Karathor had broken through one of our defensive lines. My soldiers were exhausted, running out of ammunition, and the civilians were terrified." He paused, his voice heavy with memory. "I had to make a choice. I could pull back to a more defensible position, which would have meant abandoning some of the civilians in the outer buildings. Or I could send my soldiers into a very dangerous situation to hold that line. If I was wrong, many of my people would die." "What did you do?" Lyranes asked. "I sent them," Jake said quietly. 30 soldiers into a position where they faced hundreds of Karathor. I knew some of them would not come back. And I was right. 7 did not make it. 7 people who trusted me, who followed my orders, died because of my decision." Tears appeared in his eyes, though he tried to blink them away. "I remember all their names. Ben Carter, Lisa Chen, Frank Martinez, Sam Washington, Nina Patel, Chris O'Brien, and Danny Kim. I remember their faces. I visit their families when I can and tell them their loved ones were heroes. But the truth is they died because I sent them there." Lyranes felt her own eyes growing wet. "But you saved the civilians." "Yes," Jake said. "We saved everyone in that colony. But those 7 soldiers still died, and I live with that every day. People call me a hero, but I feel like a man who could not find a better way. A smarter person would have saved everyone, soldiers and civilians both." He looked at her and she saw the pain clearly in his face. "The stories make it sound glorious. They talk about my brilliant tactics and my courage. They do not talk about the nightmares or the guilt or the fear I felt every single moment. They do not talk about how I still wake up sometimes thinking I am back there, still fighting, still making impossible choices." Lyranes realized she had been wrong about Jake Morrison. He was not a monster who felt nothing. He was someone who felt too much, who carried the weight of every decision and every loss. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I judged you based on stories without knowing the truth." Jake shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for. The stories are meant to make people feel safe, to show that humanity can protect itself. They are not meant to show the cost. And honestly, most people do not want to know the cost. They want heroes, not broken soldiers." They sat in silence for a moment, and Lyranis found that her fear was fading. She still felt nervous around Jake, but it was a different kind of nervousness now. Not fear of a monster, but uncertainty about a complicated person who had suffered greatly. "Would you tell me about your sister?" she asked. "The one who loved flowers?" Jake's sad expression softened into a small smile. "Kate was 6 years younger than me. She was always curious about everything. Our parents used to joke that her first word was why, because she never stopped asking questions." He pointed to a cluster of blue flowers nearby. "She would have loved those. She had a whole collection of pressed flowers from different places we visited. She was planning to study botany when she grew up, wanted to help terraform new worlds to make them suitable for plants and people." "She sounds wonderful," Lyranis said. "She was," Jake agreed. "She was also stubborn and brave. When the Karathor attacked our colony, she helped organize the younger children, kept them calm while the adults tried to evacuate. She was only 16, but she acted like she was much older. The survivors said she never showed fear, just kept telling the kids that everything would be okay." His voice cracked slightly. "She almost made it out. She was on one of the last transports when a Karathor missile hit. The explosion killed everyone on board instantly. The soldiers told me she would not have felt pain, but I still think about those last moments. I think about how scared she must have been despite how brave she acted." Lyranis reached out without thinking and gently touched his hand. Jake looked at her touch with surprise, and she almost pulled away. But something made her keep her hand there. "I lost my mother when I was young," Lyranis said. "She got sick with something our doctors could not cure. I still miss her every day. I still wonder what she would think of the person I have become." "I am sure she would be very proud," Jake said. "You are kind and thoughtful, and you care about doing what is right even when it is hard." They began walking again, but this time the silence between them was more comfortable. Lyranis showed him the rare plants from different worlds, explaining their history and care. Jake listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he really was a scientist at heart. They stopped at a section of the garden that featured earth plants. Someone had created a small area dedicated to flowers from various human worlds, including some from Earth itself. Jake stared at them with obvious emotion. "Roses," he breathed. "I have not seen real roses in years. The ones on military ships are all synthetic." He knelt beside the rose bushes, touching the petals gently. "My mother grew these. She said they were temperamental and difficult, but worth the effort because of how beautiful they were." She compared raising children to growing roses. You have to be patient, give them what they need, and accept that sometimes they get thorns. Lyranis knelt beside him. "They are beautiful. The gardeners have a hard time keeping them healthy here. Our climate is not quite right for them. Earth plants often struggle on other worlds," Jake said. "They evolved for very specific conditions, but they can adapt given time and care. Humans are the same way. We can live almost anywhere, but we carry Earth with us in our hearts." He stood and looked at her seriously. "Princess, I want to be honest with..." The grand dining hall was filled with light and music. Hundreds of candles floated in the air above the tables, held by some kind of technology that made them seem magical. The greatest nobles and dignitaries from across the galaxy filled the room, dressed in their finest clothes. This was the final formal dinner of the summit, a celebration of the agreements and alliances that had been formed over the past week. Princess Lyranis sat at the high table beside her father. She wore a gown of silver and blue that caught the candlelight beautifully. 3 seats down from her, Jake sat in his formal uniform, dark and decorated with medals he clearly did not enjoy wearing. She had seen him adjusting the collar several times, uncomfortable with the attention the decorations brought. Over the past days, Lyranis had spent more time with Jake. They had walked in the garden several times, attended cultural presentations together, and shared quiet conversations about their worlds and hopes. She had learned that he loved old Earth music, that he was terrible at cards but excellent at chess, and that he had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh unexpectedly. Her fear of him had faded, replaced by growing affection. He was patient with her nervousness, never pushing her to make a decision about marriage. He answered all her questions honestly, even when the truth made him look weak or uncertain. She appreciated that honesty more than she could express. Tonight, however, Jake seemed tense. She had noticed him watching the crowd carefully, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Amy stood against the wall with other military officers, and she seemed alert too. Lyranus wondered if something was wrong, but the dinner proceeded normally. Emperor Vextar stood to give a speech thanking everyone for attending the summit. He spoke about the importance of cooperation between species and the bright future they would build together. The crowd applauded politely. Then it was Prince Zelmar's turn to speak, followed by several other dignitaries. During Lord Curtin's speech about trade agreements, Lyranus noticed Jake's posture change slightly. His hand moved to his belt where she knew he kept a small weapon despite this being a formal dinner. She followed his gaze and saw nothing unusual, just servants moving along the walls with drink trays. But one servant was moving differently. While the others circulated among the guests, this one was heading toward a side door near the high table. Something about their walk seemed wrong, too purposeful and tense. Before Lyranus could say anything, Jake was moving. He stood smoothly and walked toward the servant, his movement casual enough not to alarm anyone. But Lyranus saw the deadly focus in his eyes. "Excuse me," Jake said politely to the servant. "Could I have one of those drinks?" The servant turned, and Lyranus saw their face clearly for the first time. Their eyes were wrong, filled with hate and determination. The servant dropped the tray and reached under their uniform. Everything happened very fast. The servant pulled out a weapon, but Jake was already moving. He struck the servant's arm, sending the weapon flying. More servants around the room suddenly threw off their disguises, revealing Karathor underneath. They had hidden their true forms somehow, making themselves look like harmless staff members. The hall erupted into chaos. Guests screamed and tried to flee. The Karathor attackers pulled weapons and began firing energy blasts at the high table. The royal guards moved to protect the emperor, forming a wall of bodies around him. Jake grabbed the nearest Karathor and used them as a shield, then threw them into two more attackers. His movements were precise and brutally efficient, exactly like the warrior from the stories. But Lyranus saw something else too. Even in the middle of fighting, Jake was positioning himself to protect others. He knocked one guest out of the way of a blast, then used a chair to deflect another shot that would have hit a fleeing dignitary. Amy and the other military officers were fighting too, but they were spread throughout the room. The Karathor had planned this carefully, choosing a moment when the guards were focused on the emperor and the military officers were dispersed. One Karathor broke away from the fighting and ran toward Lyranus. She froze, unable to move as the attacker raised their weapon. She saw the weapon charge, saw the hatred in the Karathor's eyes, and knew she was going to die. Then Jake was there. He appeared from nowhere, throwing himself between her and the blast. The energy weapon fired, hitting Jake in the shoulder and spinning him around. But even as he fell, he grabbed the Karathor's weapon hand and twisted, forcing them to drop it. With his other hand, he struck them in the throat, a precise blow that sent them gasping to the ground. Jake collapsed against Lyranus, his weight knocking her backward. They fell together behind the table as more blasts flew overhead. Jake's shoulder was burned badly, smoke rising from the wound, and his face was tight with pain. "Stay down," he gasped, pulling her close to the ground. "Cover your head." He held her there, his body covering hers as the battle raged around them. She could feel his heart racing, could smell the burned flesh from his wound, could hear his harsh breathing in her ear. But his arms around her were steady, protective, keeping her safe even as he was injured. The fight lasted perhaps 2 minutes, though it felt like forever. Amy and the guards finally overwhelmed the attackers. Several Karathor were killed and the rest were captured. The hall fell quiet except for the moans of the injured and the sounds of people crying. Jake slowly released Lyranus and tried to stand. He made it halfway up before his legs gave out and he collapsed again. Amy was there instantly catching him. "Jake," she said urgently. "How bad is it?" "Shoulder," he said through gritted teeth. "Hurts like hell, but I will live." "Princess, are you okay?" Lyranus realized she was shaking. Her hands trembled and her breath came in short gasps. But she was alive, completely unhurt because Jake had taken the blast meant for her. "I am fine," she managed to say. "You are hurt. You need a doctor." "She is right," Amy said. "We need to get you to the medical wing now." Medical staff were already rushing into the hall attending to the injured. Two of them came for Jake, but he waved them off. Others are hurt worse, he said. Help them first. Captain, you have a serious injury, one of the medics protested. And it is not immediately life-threatening, Jake replied firmly. There are people here who need help more than I do. I am ordering you to treat them first. The medics looked frustrated but obeyed. Amy shook her head in exasperation. You are impossible, you know that? So I've been told, Jake said, managing a weak smile despite his pain. Emperor Vextar approached, flanked by guards. His face was grim. Captain Morrison, you have my thanks. Your quick action prevented far worse damage. How many attackers were there? 12 that I saw, Jake replied. All Karathor, disguised somehow. This was planned carefully, Your Majesty. They knew the layout of the hall and the positions of the guards. Someone gave them inside information. The Emperor's expression darkened. We will investigate immediately. But right now, please let the doctors treat you. You have done enough. I will be fine, Your Majesty, Jake said. But I recommend increasing security for everyone here. If there were 12 attackers willing to die for this cause, there may be more waiting for another chance. Guards began escorting guests from the hall. Lyranis found herself being led away by her attendants, but she kept looking back at Jake. He was still sitting on the floor, his shoulder obviously causing him terrible pain, but he was talking with Amy and the other officers, already planning better security measures. Finally, when the hall was mostly empty, Jake allowed himself to be helped to the medical wing. Lyranis followed, ignoring the protests of her attendants. She needed to see that he was okay, needed to thank him properly for saving her life. The medical wing was busy with injured guests and guards. Jake was taken to a private room where doctors could work on his shoulder. Lyranis waited outside, pacing nervously until Amy came out. He will be fine, Amy said. The burn is serious, but nothing permanent. They have given him something for the pain and are working on healing the tissue now. He should make a full recovery. Can I see him? Lyranis asked. Amy smiled slightly. He asked for you. Go ahead. Lyranis entered the room quietly. Jake lay on a medical bed, his shoulder covered in some kind of healing gel that glowed softly blue. His uniform jacket had been removed, and she could see other scars on his arms and chest, evidence of previous injuries. Princess, Jake said when he saw her. His voice was a bit slurred from the pain medication. You should not be here. You should be resting after such a frightening experience. I needed to thank you, Lyranis said, moving to stand beside the bed. You saved my life. You put yourself in danger to protect me. Jake shook his head slightly. It was not even a choice. I saw you were in danger and I moved. There was no thought involved, just action. But you were hurt, Lyranis said, her voice breaking. You were hurt because of me. Better me than you, Jake said simply. I am trained to take hits. I know how to position my body to minimize damage. You do not. And more importantly, you are innocent. This war, these attacks, they are because of choices my people and the Karathor made. You had nothing to do with that. You should not suffer for it. Lyranis felt tears running down her cheeks. I was so frightened. I froze, I could not move. If you had not been there, I would have died. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the medical wing, painting the white walls in shades of gold and pink. Princess Lyranis had returned at dawn, unable to stay away. She had spent the night thinking about everything that had happened, about her decision to accept the marriage alliance, and about the man who had saved her life. Jake was awake when she entered his room. He sat up in bed, his shoulders still wrapped in healing bandages but looking much better than the night before. The medical staff had done excellent work. He smiled when he saw her. Good morning, Princess, he said. You are up early. I could not sleep, Lyranis admitted. I kept thinking about the attack, about what almost happened. That is normal, Jake said gently. Traumatic events stay with us. They replay in our minds, showing us all the ways things could have gone wrong. It will get better with time, though the memories never completely fade. Lyranis pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down. Is that what it is like for you? With the war? Jake nodded slowly. Yes, I still see the battles sometimes when I close my eyes. I still hear the sounds. There are moments when something triggers a memory and suddenly I am back there, reliving it all. The doctors call it trauma response. It is something many soldiers deal with. Does it get easier? She asked. In some ways, Jake said. You learn to manage it, to recognize when it is happening and bring yourself back to the present. And having people who understand helps. Amy has been through it too. We help each other when the memories become too much. Lyranis hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering her all night. Last night when the attack happened, you moved so fast. You knew exactly what to do. It was like the warrior from the stories, the unstoppable soldier. Does it frighten you, being able to switch into that mode so quickly? Jake looked down at his hands. Sometimes, yes. In that moment, I do not think like a normal person. I think in terms of threats and responses, trajectories and timing. Everything slows down and I see all the possibilities at once. It is useful for keeping people safe, but it is also scary because it reminds me of what I had to become during the war. He met her eyes. I do not want to be that person all the time. I want to be Jake Morrison, the scientist, the person who is curious about the universe and excited to learn new things. But I cannot fully leave behind Jake Morrison, the soldier, because that part of me is what keeps the people I love safe. The people you love, Lyranis repeated softly. Is that how you think of it? Yes, Jake said. During the war, it was my fellow soldiers, the civilians we protected, and the memory of my family. Now it includes you too. Last night when I saw the Karathor aiming at you, I did not think about politics or alliances. I thought about how wrong it would be for someone like you to be hurt, how the universe would be worse without you in it. Lyranis felt warmth spread through her chest. You barely know me. I know enough, Jake replied. I know you care about your people and want to do right by them. I know you face your fears even when you are terrified. I know you are kind to servants and thoughtful in your conversations. That is enough for me to know you are worth protecting. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Lyranis said, Tell me about the war. Not the battles everyone talks about, but what it was really like for you. Jake took a deep breath. Are you sure? It is not a pleasant story. I want to understand, Lyranis said. If we are going to marry, I need to know who you really are, including the difficult parts. Jake nodded and began to speak. The Karathor attacked without warning. One day we were going about our normal lives, and the next day our colonies were burning. I was finishing my doctorate in xenobiology on Earth when I got the message that my family's colony had been hit. I tried to contact them for 3 days before I learned they were gone. His voice remained steady, but Lyranis could see the pain in his eyes. I joined the military immediately. They put me through an accelerated training program because they needed officers desperately. I was good at tactics, at seeing patterns and finding solutions. They promoted me quickly, maybe too quickly. My first command was a small outpost on the edge of human space. We had 50 soldiers and a few automated defense systems. The Karathor sent a raiding party of 200 to destroy us. I was terrified. I was 26 years old, barely trained and responsible for 50 lives. Jake paused, remembering. We could not fight them directly. We were too few and too weak, so I had to think differently. I studied everything I could find about Karathor psychology and tactics. They were honorable warriors who valued direct combat and saw tricks as cowardly, so I used every trick I could think of. We set traps in places they would never expect. We made them think we had more soldiers than we did by constantly moving and changing positions. We attacked their supply lines and then disappeared before they could respond. It worked, but it felt wrong. I kept thinking about how my professors would have been disappointed in me for abandoning scientific thinking for military strategy. Lyranis listened carefully as Jake continued. He told her about the escalation of the war, about how each battle taught him new lessons about what worked and what did not. He spoke about the soldiers under his command, how he tried to learn everyone's name and remember details about their families. The siege of Colony 7 was the worst, Jake said quietly. People talk about it like it was glorious, but it was hell. We were cut off from supplies, running out of ammunition, and watching our defenses crumble bit by bit. I had to make impossible choices every hour. Who to send where, what to defend and what to abandon, how to ration our dwindling resources. The hardest moment came on the second night. I had a young soldier named Sam Washington. He was 19 years old, fresh out of training. He came to me and said he was scared, that he did not think he could keep fighting. I wanted to tell him it was okay to be scared, that I was scared too. But I could not. I needed him to fight. Jake's voice grew thick with emotion. So I lied to him. I told him we were going to win, that reinforcements were coming soon, that everything would be fine. I looked him in the eyes and gave him false hope because I needed him to keep going. And he believed me. He went back to his position and fought bravely. And then he died holding that position, believing the whole time that he just needed to last a little longer. Tears ran down Jake's face now. When the siege ended and reinforcements finally came, I went to where Sam had fallen. He had written a letter,